All right, so back again, make sure this thing is running. Yes. I had all this footage on the GoPro and my new program, not only the app, but the program I downloaded from GoPro is a little bit iffy. I used to have a good GoPro set up years ago, but that was when the 3 was around. So now I've got, I just bought a 10, and of course programming's changed and the apps change and everything's different now. So I'm still yet figuring out, but I lost the footage and my GoPro's giving me fits at the moment. So we'll just do it with the iPhone, and it shoots great video anyway. So, okay, so Warrior's back. This is the second time it's been back, or actually it's the third. So since you guys probably seen the last video, the customer had it and he had it about a day and it started running into issues. First thing I did to check it was this thing does have an onboard diagnostic setup where you can run, you know, a few tests here and there, and it will, you know, store a few engine codes. So that was the first thing I did. And what I wanted to see is if the injectors were triggering like they should, and to make sure the ignition, as far as the coils, is firing like it should. What I did find is on the rear cylinder, when you do the setup on here and then you do the diagnostic function where it will trigger the injector, it'll flash the engine light, the check engine light, and every time it flashes, it'll trigger the injector so you can hear it clicking, click, click, click. It'll do it 5 times, and then you can go to the front injector, do the same thing. Well, the rear one was intermittent. Like when he first brought it back, or when I got it, anyway, the rear would not pulse like it should. So my first thing is in the front one was triggering just like it should. I mean, it was fine, but the rear one wasn't. So I pulled the fuel feed line off of this side, and I put, you know, direct seafoam injector cleaner directly down into the line, and that way I filled up the complete line and then put it back together, clamped everything off, and then turned the ignition on to prime the fuel pump. And I did that a few times, and then I went back through the diagnostic setup and hit that rear injector and triggered it, and it started coming back alive. And I thought, well, maybe this one's going out, or maybe, who knows? Because the other part of it was I also had to test the fuel pressure on it. Well, when I tested the fuel pressure, it was at 20 PSI with the ignition on. It should be 55. So we're less than half. That's not good at all. And then when I started the bike, it would jump up about 3 PSI, maybe 4 at the most. So about 24 pounds of pressure at the most. And that's even wide open throttle with a load on it, very low. So I sourced the fuel pump through AutoZone. They didn't have one here in town, so I went a little ways down the road, down to the hub, and picked one up. In the tank here, all drains down into the reservoir. So when you see the low fuel light, it's running out of that reservoir from that point on. And it's not very big. I would say there's probably a couple of liters in there. So if your light comes on one of these, you know, these 1700 Warriors like this one, you don't have much fuel, because in that kind of a bladder looking setup for where the fuel pump housing is, and that's also the return side. The fuel pump sets down in there, so that takes up a lot of room as well. So there's not a lot of fuel in there. So if you see that light come on, you might want to get to a station pretty quick. I don't know how long, you know, how far that'll take you as far as fuel goes, but I would assume it wouldn't be that far, especially the way this thing was running, because the other part of it was, once I put the fuel pump in, everything seemed to be fine. The thing ran really well. Actually, it ran better than it did before. I mean, it started up easier. You no longer had to roll on the throttle like we were doing before. You can just sit out here, back the turn screw all the way out, and just fire the bike, and it would fire off no problem. So, returned it back to him. Also, the tire was leaking a little bit because the bead on this side didn't quite get seated, so I got that kind of figured out and had to break the bead back down, get everything cleaned back up, and reseat the bead. And he had it for about 2 days and started running poorly again. Kind of the same symptoms. You know, kind of like it was either not hitting fully on both cylinders, or it was kind of not really hitting on this, you know, one cylinder. And I figured it was rear because of the injector issue. So, and actually it happened when he come and picked it up. And so, you know, one of the times, so I pulled the plugs on it, and they were absolutely sooted, just completely. They weren't fuel soaked. The fuel did try to burn. You know, there was no liquid fuel on it, but man, they were black. I started black as a tank was, and you know, that was from the electrode all the way down. You could even see the insulator on the inside of that spark plug. So I knew, okay, it's running very rich, extremely rich. Well, why is it running extremely rich? The power commander seems to be responding. Everything seems to be fine on that side. We know we have good fuel pressure now. Maybe it's too much fuel pressure, but I checked the specs again on the maximum fuel pressure, and we were within that threshold. So I knew on that side we're fine. And this is a setup where, like on the Ducati, it regulates fuel going in the injector. So if you have 55 going in, it regulates it down to like 42 or whatever the case may be. So it regulates before it gets the injectors. Well, this regulates after. So you have full pressure, whatever the fuel pump is pushing, it's pushing that to the injectors. And then on the return side of the injector rail that goes back into that reservoir tank, on the return side, it gets regulated back down from there. I guess that's because aeration of fuel, and that way it doesn't overbuild pressure here as far as that goes. So your injectors are always at pressure, and then on the return side, it doesn't build so much pressure that it has to vent out here, and you would hear that up in the tank here, because there's no vents as far as I could see in that fuel pump reservoir, but there are natural vents, of course, up on top, up here on the fuel cap, and it vents out the side into a little charcoal canister and goes out to atmosphere. So with that being said, the fuel pump is replaced, fuel pressure is good, everything's good, the spark plugs are very dark. Well, when I replaced the fuel pump, there's not much of a filter set up there. There's a little sock, like a lot of electronic fuel pumps have. There's a small sock, and there's kind of a little bit of a reservoir on that pump assembly itself that it does pump fuel into and then goes out. And it was pretty dirty, so I sprayed as much cleaner as I could in it and got it to come out clean eventually. But my concern was how much rust has gone through the system, because if there was rust right under that fuel sock, then it's got to go through the system, because there's really not much to pick it up. So once I cleaned that out, I got to looking into what injectors might cost, and I sourced a set of injectors, same part number, same flow rate, same everything. A set of 4 for like 40 bucks. How long are they gonna last? I don't know. So we got 2 extra. Even though this has 4 spark plugs, it's got two injectors. But some bikes, like some 4-cylinder bikes, like the Hondas and the CBRs and stuff like that, the 600 RRs, and I even think up to the 1000. Since I think 05, they had a secondary set of injectors. So they had the ones out on the throttle body, which was normal, and then up on top of the air box, they had a secondary set of injectors, kind of a shower injection. So sometimes they could have 2, sometimes they could have 4. You know, they could have 2 per cylinder or 1 per cylinder. They could, it just depends. But this only has 2. So once I sourced the injectors, pulled the fuel tank off, pulled the air box out, got down to the throttle bodies, and you gotta pull the throttle bodies off, get them out of the way, and then you can pull the intakes down the lower end where the fuel rail is and the injector sit in, because it does inject directly into the top of the combustion chamber. I mean, intake valves, kind of like the Ducati does. So once I got all that out, pull the injectors. I even pulled the little screens out of the injectors, because of course I had replacements, so why not just pull the screens? But there was sediment in there, but that stuff, it was so fine that it could get past that. And if it gets past that, then it gets down into, on the injector nozzle itself, there's 4 small holes, and they're very small. It would only fire out of 2, and I have a previous video of that injector tester setup I had. So I put the injectors in that and tested them, and on both of them, it would only fire out of 2. It wouldn't fire out off of all 4. So knowing there, we have a restriction as far as that goes. So the injectors were on the way out. And I also tested with the ohm meter, and they were on the top end of the scale. Like, they were at almost a little bit too much high resistance. I mean, it was like 14.8, 14.9. These were like 14.9. I do believe, if I recall right. So not only with that, but it's also solenoid, so it's constantly getting triggered back and forth to let the fuel pressure in and inject, as it should. So any kind of rust or contaminants to get past that filter system is going to go through the injectors, and it's going to wear them out. This thing has 50,000 miles on it as well, so might as well replace those. So once all that was done, the thing I really wanted to understand is why was it so rich? And this has 2 air filters set up. It has one over here on the ram air side. This is an aftermarket kind of set up here, but it's a K&M behind it, and then it kind of has a snorkel tube that comes up and runs into the side of the air box. But there's also one on top, and I've got the paperwork, and I may have mentioned in one of the videos I did on this. But I just capped the top off because it was missing. The filter was gone. The little ram air scoop on the top was gone. Everything was gone, so I capped it. And I think, honestly, that was my mistake. There's no way this thing can get enough air into the air box and feed this thing like it should. So what I'm thinking, it was just choking the engine out. And when it chokes it out, of course, it's going to pump. It's not going to pump too much fuel, but it's not going to get enough air to burn properly. Because that was the thing that I really wanted, that plugs really showed. Even though they were dark and sooted and too much fuel, they weren't wet. So it was trying to burn the fuel as much as it could, but it wasn't burning it at the proper ratio. Which at idle, this thing should be like 14.6 or so, maybe a little bit lower. And then under full throttle, like 12. 2, 8, whatever. You can look up the specs on it, but that's generally where the good ratio is under idle and then under maximum full throttle, under load. So once I figured that, we got to return this thing at least as close back to stock as we can. As far as that goes, I sourced the filter, which wasn't very expensive. I sourced the little ram air setup, the little scoop that's on the back here. And I think for both of those, under 40 bucks. So it's a very cheap, brand new filter as well. So now that that's all back together, the bike fires exactly like it should, runs really well. I haven't taken it out on the road yet because it's been really chilly, and I got a few more things I got to do before I take it out on the road and get it under, loaded conditions. I went ahead and got rid of all of the heat wrap that was on this. I'm gonna re-wrap them, but also I have a setup now where I can tap into here and here, and I'm gonna run an O2 sensor setup, and I'll show you that as well. That way I can actually read it at idle, and then under load conditions, partial throttle, medium throttle, and then full throttle under load. That way I can read it out on the fly going down the road and see exactly what it's doing, and then adjust the power programmer to that because it has, a low, medium, and high setting, and that's a low speed, medium speed, and high speed setting. So you can adjust out, I think every increment's like 10%. So that's really good, especially with that O2 sensor setup. That way I can read it out and adjust everything, and we know it's exactly where it should be at all times. And then once, everything is tuned exactly how it should, pull the O2 sensors out, put the caps in there, and then, like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and rewrap the headers as well. I'm gonna do individual here, and individual here, and then wrap them both together here all the way out to these turnouts he put on. I do like the turnouts, but they're a little bit low as far as the angle. So what I gotta do is, I was gonna have to weld them up anyway because he couldn't get the welds fully rounded up. Of course, it's a little bit tight in there. But what I'm also gonna do is once I cut them off, I'm gonna angle them up a little bit because if you take a right-hand turn, even coming out of my driveway, this will scrape. So I'm gonna kind of work those over a little bit. I may have to cut them back a little bit or something like that, here or so, and still keep that angle that he likes. But we gotta kind of get them up and out of the way of the ground because it doesn't even hit the peg yet. It'll hit the exhaust, which is, that's, you're a few inches from your your maximum roll angle to the exhaust to that, to your little tab that's on the end of the peg there. So we'll take that out as well and get that figured out. So I'll show you kind of what's up here on what got replaced. Like I said, I think if I remember right, I already had mentioned that on a previous video. So this is the airbox setup, and this setup here, that's the stock setup, but it's essentially the same thing, even though that little ram air is. So air coming in here, and there's that little snorkel coming up, and it goes in the side of the airbox over here, where that little A is there, if you can see that. This is a secondary air filter setup. So you got a filter, it's got its own little gasket on it, sets down in the base on top of the airbox there, and then it's got a little scoop there. So that's what was replaced, this and this. And I already had bolts because I have a lot of metric bolts, so that was no big deal. Other than that, like I said, injectors, fuel pump, setup here, that's basically the setup there. And this is all downloaded off the internet, off of a Yamaha site that I do buy a few parts from here and there because they got really good schematics like these, and they usually have pretty good parts on there. As far as availability. So that's the replacement side of what's been replaced on it to get it back to running condition and hopefully right. And this is the other setup as well. Oh, okay, I think that's about as much as it's gonna allow me on that. Okay, so you can buy these O2 sensor setups, this gauge setup like this from various manufacturers. I wanted to innovate it because not only does it use, parts that you can go down and get from the parts store. You may have to change the plug. I don't know if you ever had to do that, but these are Bosch sensors, so they're really easy to get. These are just kind of all the connectors and things of that nature, the control box, the connector for the other O2 sensor. But this gauge setup is a dual O2 sensor setup. So let me pull out a package here. That way you can actually see it. That light kind of blocks it out there. So, and that's it. So it says dual lambada, and that's what they call it in the industry. As far as I can tell, a lambada is the O2 sensor. So when this thing is fired up and working, you'll see your top readout, which you could say is front cylinder, and then the bottom readout, rear cylinder. So it's a single gauge for two O2 sensor setups, and it has a different bezel and all that stuff. And it also did come with a couple of steel bungs. I ordered extras because I'm gonna do his bike, and I think I'm gonna do mine too, the Ducati, because you can buy aftermarket adapters, but I'm not sure about the consistency of the reading. But these were very cheap, and they're already cut out for the exhaust, so you can basically just knock a hole that's big enough for the O2 sensor to get in there, and you don't have to, this is a lot shorter as well, and that way you don't have to go all the way through. And that's what I was gonna do with these, either cut them down to make them work and make them fit a little bit better, but I think I bought 4 of these, and if anything, I'll use 2 on my bike and then 2 on his. But they're all stainless as well. And that's another thing I was looking at as well, because these are just, you know, of course, mild steel. That's what comes with the kit. But once you get two dissimilar metals, and especially a really thick metal like this, comparably to that really thin exhaust, your heat and expansion, and then, you know, when it cools down, that can start to form cracks, of course, and that's what I don't want, is for these to start leaking. So at least we have two similar metals. It's 304 stainless, and that exhaust is also 304 stainless. So it's similar metals. I have enough filler rod to do it. I have plenty of filler rod. So that way I don't have to try to figure out what kind of odd, you know, whatever filler rod to make both these works and the welds not crack out. Well, if it's two similar metals with good filler rod, you know, exact filler rod that needs, and that's it. But so that's the setup that can be used on multiple bikes. If you've got a 4-into-1 system, you could run one O2 sensor, you know, because it can run either 1 or 2. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever you plug into the system. But this can be used on multiple bikes. But I may end up having to buy that adapter, because this O2 sensor is an automotive style and is a wideband as well. But the size of it is a lot bigger than a lot of motorcycles run. But they do make an adapter that slips over this and kind of chokes it down, and that way you can pull the plugs on a bike that does have a setup for it, even though it may not have the O2 sensors, or it does, and you want an actual physical reading. You can run the adapter in there, get the O2 readings, and then put the plug back in and pull the adapter off of it and run whatever. But yeah, this is a kit that I've been looking at for a while, and this was a good case to go ahead and buy it as a part of my tool set for doing what I'm doing. And I think it'll make it a lot more convenient, especially, like I said, if the bike's already got a kind of a O2 sensor plug set up on it. We can work around that. But if it doesn't, then I have to take and, you know, drill and weld the bungs in there and do all that. That's a little bit more work, but then we could get an accurate reading off of it. And the other thing is I bought a couple of rolls of heat wrap, of course. And this kit, I don't know how good the quality is. It seemed to have pretty good reviews. You know how that goes. That can be 50-50, who knows. But it also came with the ties as well, and these are really nice. On that bike particularly, when they did the setup on it, they just use hose clamps, which is fine. I mean, you got to do what you got to do what you want. But I kind of like using these because they do hold very tight and they look really nice, and you can get them into a small spot. And this kit came with quite a bit. I think there's 20 here. I bought 2 kits basically. So plenty of that. That way we can get it done and get it done right. And so that's kind of where I'm at on it. So I gotta figure out exactly where I want to put them, because they don't have to look really nice when they're in here. This is just for testing purposes. So once they're done, of course, pull the O2s around and cap it, and you'll never see them again, because I plan on wrapping over them. But if we need to get to them after that, what I could do is just kind of cut out where that bolt is, where the bung is down in there, and then you know, have them exposed. I mean, it's all for looks. You know, it'd be the customer's opinion. Me, it really wouldn't matter, because especially on the Ducati, where the O2 sensor block-offs are on that, they're up under the fairings, so even if you had the O2 sensor in them or out, you would never know the difference, as you know, looking at it, because it's up under the bike, so it's hidden under the fairings. So I got to figure out exactly where I want these, you know, and start, you know, drilling these out and getting them to that size that I want there. Clean the pipes up really well and weld them, and then do the turnouts and get those correct the way they're supposed to be, the way, you know, that way they don't hit the ground as much, and fully weld those, because that's another thing. It does have an exhaust leak on the back side of these, and we don't want that, because that's just going to wear that heat wrap out a lot quicker. So get those re-angled and get everything welded up, and then put the system back together, and then get that set up, because I still haven't even wired anything in. But get it set up on this bike, and then run the gauge, say, up here, you know, and then use a zip tie, whatever, just hold on there. It's just temporary. And then that way I can get a good readout. I know where I'm at on the bike, and that way I'm a lot more comfortable with saying, hey, it's good to go, because otherwise I'm just kind of educatedly guessing and hoping that everything is as good as it can be. Well, with that O2 sensor set up like that, at least we'll be pretty damn close, as far as I can tell. So a little bit of work, but not too terrible. And like I said, I get to kind of run a new setup on that. Like I said, I've been wanting that for a while. Just didn't want to shell out the money for it, but you know, it is what it is. That can be very helpful on this side of the business. And I'll probably order those adapters, like I said, that way I have those, and that way I don't have to mess around with different setups. I can just put the adapter on and run them in there. And like my bike, I know for a fact those are way smaller than that one, but they do have the adapter. So if I do that, then I can use it on my bike and, you know, just recap the system and call it good. So, but like I said, so far so good. She starts up really well. I'll start up and that'll kind of close out the video, and then maybe I'll do a few videos on what I'm doing here and kind of a little bit different on that as well. So we'll see. So it's been set here for a bit, so and it's probably 60 degrees out here. Yeah, I'd say 60. So key on, pump off, came on just fine, turned off, we're in neutral, and of course not rolling on the throttle anymore. Like I said, and that's that solenoid as well that we're gonna take care of some other time. But like I said, it starts up great now. No roll on the throttle. It idles a lot better, and that's what this fast idle adjustment screw all the way out. So that's the way it should be. And the fast idle screw is usually for when it's a lot colder. That way, you can build up engine temperature a little bit quicker. And once you get rolling down the road and back it off, and it's not like a choke where you're choking it out. All it's doing is open the throttle bodies up just a little bit, open it up for a little bit more air to get in. So yeah, so I think we're on a good path. I think I got a good game plan going on, and like I said, hopefully I'll make a few more videos and kind of go through the process maybe of drilling things and then welding them and then whatever. So, all right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.